Okay, what we want to do today is continue discussing the things that we started with last time. Consumer Price Index, you remember we were talking about. And I think what I want to do is talk about the inflation rate. When we talk about the inflation rate, what people have in mind is this is the annual percentage change. Let me not say change, but let me say increase in the CPI. Let me give you an example. Suppose that the Consumer Price Index in 1990, I think I had that written down actually, in 1990 was 130.7. We'll just suppose that was the Consumer Price Index in 1990. What do I have here? 1991, it was 136.2. This is 1990, 1991. It was 136.2. So, first of all, we can see that the price level went up from 1990 to 1991. And so there was definitely an increase in the price level. And so we definitely had inflation. But how much? We don't want to just know that there was inflation, but we want to know the rate. And it's a fairly simple thing to say the change in the price index, let me give you a formula, the inflation rate equals the change, I'm using the delta sign, the change in the CPI divided by the original CPI. Okay, now the change in the CPI, 136.2 minus 130.7 equals 5.5. The index number increased by 5.5 units. The original amount was 130.7. By the way, that reminded me to do one more thing. We need to come out here, we did this the other day, multiply by 100. So we get this in whole numbers rather than in decimals. But anyway, it's 4.21%. So, in that 1 year, the price level went up by 4.2%. All right? Is that a lot? Not very much? Well, a lot or not very much, what we would do is really, we could compare that to previous years or we could compare it to a historical average. What I like to do is I compare the inflation rate to what happens to my pay. If my pay goes up, let's say 5%, and the inflation rate's 4.1, that means that I got 5% more money to spend, but the things I'm buying are 4.2% more expensive than before. So then I can buy all the things I used to buy and a little bit more. So if you compare your pay, how much it goes up, not its inflation rate, but it's your pay increase as a percent. If you compare that percent to the inflation rate, you can tell whether you're sort of gaining ground or losing ground. If your pay goes up 3% and the price level goes up 4.2%, you cannot buy the same bundle of goods and services that you were able to purchase in the year before because that bundle is now more expensive, enough more expensive. It absorbs everything that you, of your pay increase and a little bit more. Let me ask you this question. Let's just leave this at 4% and forget about the 4.2 for just a second. Let's say that the inflation rate's 4%. How long would it take for the price level to double? Remember that formula? The rule was 72. How long for something to double? We know here this is 4%. 72 equals 4 times T. T is the time to double. Now it's the price level, not an investment. Divide both sides by 4. Those cancel. T equals 18. So in 18 years, the price level will double if it's growing at 4% a year. Hey, I smell a good test question. What if the inflation rate is 3% a year? How long to double the price level? Anybody? 72 divided by 3, 24. Okay, so anyway, I kind of keep that in mind. How do we use the consumer price index? I didn't write anything on the board, but one use I just told you a moment ago, you can compare the increase in prices to the increase in your pay. And that's how a lot of people use it. By the way, we can do exactly the same thing for the United States economy. What we could say is something like this. Oh, gross domestic product, that's the total value of all the production that occurs in the United States. Let's say that the market value of gross domestic product, it goes up 5%. If the inflation rate is 4%, then what we would say is, yeah, the market value of everything we produce has gone up by 5%, but 4% of that was accounted for by rising prices. And in terms of the physical goods and services, we're only producing about 1% more. 1% more goods and services, 4% higher prices, that would cause the GDP to rise by 5%. So that is one application. Here's another application, is that we can basically calculate what we would call our real income. Real income equals money income divided by the CPI divided by 100. If you remember, I told you we were going to have to come back to that topic later on. We multiply by 100 when we're calculating the CPI, so now we have to divide by 100 to get that 100 out of there. Okay, but to give you an example, suppose that your income's $22,000. Okay, and suppose that there's income. Suppose today's CPI is, I don't know, 160. I'll put 1.60 if it's 160. CPI equals 160, and then I've divided by 100. Then, let's see, 22,000 divided by 1.6 equals 13,750. What's that mean? Today's $22,000 in income would purchase goods valued at $13,750 in the base year, in the base period. And if you remember, that's 1982 through 84. Okay, we just take today's money income and we divide by the CPI, and now we've calculated this real income measure. Now, let me tell you something. Since we don't have, like a Wayback Machine, we can't do time traveling and so forth, you might say, I don't really care what my income today would have purchased in 1983. It just isn't interesting to me. And that's not interesting to me either, but the point is that sometimes something like this would come up. Maybe your income today is $22,000. The price level's 1.60 or 160 today. So we know this first piece of information. Suppose I tell you this, hey, your pay is going up to $25,000 next year. And next year, the consumer price index will be 163, let's say 1.63. And now we can do another calculation of real income. This is your money wages. There's the, in next year. And here's the CPI divided by 100 next year. So when we do this division, $25,000 divided by 1.63, that's equal to 15,337. Next year's pay would be enough to have purchased $15,337 worth of goods and services back in 1982 through 84. Now, here's where we actually use these. Neither one of these and I should write down real income next year. Usually people don't know what their income is going to be next year. But anyway, we're not very interested in one of these or the other one, but we can use them together. And here's what we would do. We say, look, in 1 year my money income was $13,750. Not my money, my real income, $13,750. The next year it's $15,337. And so the percentage change in real income is equal to the change in my real income divided by my original real income. The change, you can say 15,337 minus 13,750 and so forth. This comes out to 11.5%. Now, this is the thing I'm saying that is important. Not one of those numbers or the other one. But what we can say now is, hey, I got a pay increase from $22,000 to $25,000, and forgetting about the base year or anything else, that means my pay went up by 11.5% in terms of its purchasing power. In terms of purchasing power, I'm 11.5% better off. And that has nothing to do with the base year. All we were doing is trying, here's the thing, the $25,000, that was in next year's dollars, and the $22,000, that was in this year's dollars. And this year's dollars and next year's dollars aren't really comparable. And the reason they aren't is prices are changing. And so what we want to do is we want to convert the $22,000 in this year's dollars into terms, 1982 through 84 dollars, but we want to convert these into dollars that can be compared to the 25,000. So we convert them both into dollars in the base year. And then we compare those dollars, and what we say is we're up 11.5%. And now forgetting about the base year, that means that your real pay has gone up. Questions about this? If your pay does not keep up with the inflation rate, if your pay goes up, as I say, 5% and the inflation rate is 6%, you're falling behind all the time. And that's something, of course, that causes unions and workers in general to bargain for higher wages. What I thought I would do is show you just very briefly that there's a publication. It's in the library. You can subscribe to it. It's called the CPI Detailed Report. What's it say? CPI Detailed Report. And I put a few little bookmarks in here just so I could sort of open this up and mention a couple of things to you. Here's a table I see. It says Historical Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers. And it goes back to 1960 up to until the present. And it shows monthly numbers for that. 1960, the Consumer Price Index was 29.3. So 29.3, that was 1982, 84 is equal to 100. So that means that prices a little bit more than tripled from 1960 to 1982, 84. There's all kinds of other price indexes in here. It's just table after table, I'll sort of thumb through there, of various information about the Consumer Price Index. They've got price indexes for some major cities, for example. Here's one that I highlighted. It's got the U.S. average, and I told you that there are actually hundreds of goods in that market basket that gets priced. But you'll see something like this. I just highlighted one thing. Here's ground chuck, which is a form of hamburger, of course. And in January of '96, that ground chuck was selling for $1.79, 1799. And then in February of '96, that same hamburger was selling for $1.796. That's a national average. They priced ground chuck in dozens of cities and came up with these averages. And what you can see is that the price of hamburger, or ground chuck, because right below the ground chuck is ground beef. And so there's many different grades of hamburger. Let me just kind of read a few of these to you. I'm not going to do any calculation here, but you can see that just that one little component of the Consumer Price Index went down by 4/10 of a cent in that month. But here's a few of the things just under the meat, poultry, fish, and eggs category. It says ground chuck, ground beef, lean and extra lean, ground roast, chuck roast, choice and boneless, ground roast, choice, boneless, ground roast, or round roast now, graded and ungraded. Rib roast, choice, bone in. Steak, T-bone, choice, bone in. I guess that means it's still got the bone in. Steak, ribeye, steak, round, graded and ungraded. Steak, sirloin, graded and ungraded. This just goes on, and then finally we get to the porks. Ham, shoulder picnic ham. Other meats, frankfurters, lamb and mutton. This just goes on and on. How much for one of those bologna steaks? It's in there. So anyway, a bologna steak. The point is, though, is that there are hundreds of items in the basket, and then each one of those items gets priced in a large number of cities and different stores within each one of those cities. My brother used to work at a retail store in Kansas City, and I guess it was once a month they would come around the Labor Department. That's who does this. It says here Bureau of Labor Statistics. The Labor Department would come around to his store and get a few prices, but they didn't price everything. They had a very sophisticated method for picking, sort of doing a random sampling, and so they would come around and get a few prices and then leave. Okay, so hundreds of items. And then, of course, they get into specific product names, different stores, and so forth. This is a, can you imagine doing this every single month, year after year? But I mean, there are thousands of stores and hundreds of stores, I should say, thousands of items that are priced in that consumer price index. Okay, the second major topic that we want to talk about in this unit of material is the unemployment rate. We've talked about the CPI, and if you'll remember, what we're doing is we're talking about key concepts that surface over and over when you talk about macroeconomics. Okay. First of all, let me mention this. To produce more goods, more workers are required, and that suggests a lower unemployment rate. And the reason I write this up here is just to bring this back to you. Sometimes you're thinking about unemployment. Sometimes you might be thinking about the production level. Is the gross domestic product increasing? Are we producing more goods? And this issue of unemployment is not separate from the issue of gross domestic product and how much do we produce, because as we produce more, we need more workers and the unemployment rate goes down. There's an inverse relationship, I'm saying, between this production level in the economy, gross domestic product, and the unemployment rate. Production up, unemployment down. So during a period of prosperity, when there's a lot of production and incomes are rising, unemployment is declining. Let's introduce a few terms or concepts to begin with. First is let's see how this is stated, is the civilian non-institutional population. Civilian non-institutional population, age 16 and over. This is pretty straightforward stuff. When we say civilian, we're not including the people in the military. When we say non-institutional, people in jails or other types of institutions are left out and hospitalized and so forth. And then age 16 and over, you guys know what that means, age 16 and over. This is considered to be basically the pool of everybody who could potentially work if they wanted to. These are the people who could work if they want to. If you're in jail or if you're in the military, then if you're in the military, you're not a civilian. If you're in jail, you're institutionalized. So you can't just get out and go to work over at the Dairy Queen or something like that. But if you're age 16 and over and you are not in the military and you're not institutionalized, then presumably you could go to work at the Dairy Queen or Bass Pro Shop or someplace like that. So the point is, this is the pool of people who are eligible to work. Potentially. Okay? This also includes people who are 80. Now, people that are 80 usually don't go and get a job, but the point is, they could. So this is all the people who are potentially out there that could go to work. Civilian labor force. These are people who have jobs, and people who are searching for jobs. And I didn't write it down, but I mean people without a job that are searching for jobs. So these are employed people and unemployed people. They're unemployed, or they're employed or unemployed. People with jobs, people that don't have jobs but want one, who are looking for them. Let's put a couple of numbers on these. This is about, this civilian non-institutional population, about 210 million people. That's all the basically adults that are walking around, you know, free to choose on their own, about 210 million. And the number of people in the civilian labor force, about 140 million. Gosh, that's sure worked out, didn't it? About 2/3 of the population, that civilian non-institutional population, about 2/3 of them either have jobs or are looking for jobs. A third group, or not a third group, but a term, which I just talked about, labor force participation rate. LFPR. That's the civilian labor force divided by that non-institutional population. And so that's saying 67% of all of those people eligible to work, again, the adults that are free to come and go as they please, about 2/3 of them have decided to work. Now, I'm not saying everybody's successful, but about 2/3 of them want to work. Most of them have jobs, some are still looking. That's where we'll pick up next time, and I'll see you later.
Well, since we've been talking about labor and the labor force, it seems like a good time to visit the State Employment Office in Springfield. There's a chance you'll end up here someday if you haven't already. As Professor Wyrick's about to find out, the people who work here know a lot about labor.
It's almost like sitting in the middle of the Battlefield Mall at Christmas time and watching people walk past. That's exactly what walks in this door every day.
Just everybody. Doctors, lawyers.
Everybody. Indian chiefs, you bet. Had an Elvis impersonator in here one day, yeah.
Historically speaking, many people think of the Employment Office as the unemployment office, a place to line up when you're out of work. But a changing economy and technology have changed all that.
About 65 to 70% of the applicants who are looking for work through our office are actually employed.
So they already have jobs.
And are looking for something better. An applicant can register for work online. They can do that at home, on their home computer. They can do it at the library, which offers free access. They can do it in here.
And I guess an employer could also come down here and use your computer.
Certainly. In fact, we have some that do.
The web address for the Employment Office is www.works.state.
Okay.
Besides internet access, the office also has more traditional means of communication.
That's it.
Brochures, flyers, and even a good old-fashioned bulletin board. But providing information is only one part of the mission.
This is a claims center. May I have your social security number, please?
The office also processes unemployment insurance claims. Time was, people had to stand in line to get unemployment checks. Today, claims are made by phone. Callers input basic information by using a touch-tone phone. Then they get to talk to a real person.
And do you expect to go back to work for them?
If they meet the requirements, then we establish a claim providing them with a letter giving their weekly benefit amount, their total maximum amount of benefits. The most in Missouri can be now is $220 a week and 26 weeks at that rate.
That's the most benefits you can receive, no matter what
Right.
you earned before. $225 a week,
$220,
$220 a week.
yeah, and then 26
For
weeks
26
at that rate.
weeks.
Yeah.
So that comes
It can-
out to $5,000 to $6,000 in
Yes.
that range.
Mhm.
Unemployment checks are basically meant for those who are laid off. If you're fired from a job or if you quit, it could make getting the payments harder.
Then we have to establish whether or not there was any misconduct connected with the work on their part that contributed to their being discharged. And if we find there is, then they can be penalized for unemployment benefits as well. For a quit, it's a more severe penalty because you have to work and earn certain wages. For a discharge, you are assessed a certain number of penalty weeks, anywhere from 4 to 16. After you serve those penalty weeks, you can start receiving unemployment. A basic requirement, as far as being eligible for unemployment benefits, the things I generally tell people, there's 3 things. They have to be able to work full-time, available for full-time work, and actively seeking full-time work, as long as they don't have a work search waiver of any kind. And
In the last years of the 20th century, national unemployment rates have dramatically fallen. That means a big change in the job marketplace. In times of high unemployment, employers are very picky about whom they hire. With low unemployment rates, it's a different story.
Then it becomes very much an applicant's market. Then if an applicant isn't happy with the wages that he's making or his supervisor or his working conditions or how far he has to drive to work or the time he has to get up in the morning, he's comfortable with the idea that he doesn't have to put up with that. He doesn't have to work under those conditions. He can quit that job and go to work somewhere else. Bad side of that is we create a generation of people who think that they can move from one thing to another without worrying too much about it. There will always be another job out there, and they create a rotten work record and a very poor work ethic.
So if that unemployment rate goes back up again, that person may have trouble finding.
Those people are gonna be hurting, as my granddaughter would say, because they don't have the work background that an employer in demand will require.